all of China's prosperity happened because China introduced capitalist free markets. Markets aren't actually what makes an economy capitalist or socialist. According to Karl Marx, it all has to do with private versus public ownership.
Y'all, I gotta sit for this one. So, as you saw, this TikToker claims that China is the proof that socialism works. And then she goes on to say that, well, yes, China has free markets, but free market is not what we have to look at when we decide whether a country is socialist or capitalist. And then she says that it's about who owns the companies. Well, okay. So if ownership is a test, let's take it. For example, under Mao in China, everything was state-owned, literally everything. That was genuine socialism. The state owned the land, controlled the production, and private profit was banned. And the result was a disaster. 88% of the population lived in poverty. Tens of millions of people died in the famine, and GDP per person was $156. Then Xiaoping broke with his model. He opened up the economy, made it so that farmers could take profits, and private businesses started to emerge. State-owned enterprises went from about 3/4 of industrial output in the early 1980s to under 30% by the mid-1990s. Well, it's true that China did not call itself capitalist or anything like that, and analysts usually say that China at that time was a mixed system. They also emphasize that the profits only started coming and the country started flourishing after China opened up to free market systems. And now this brings us to the point where this TikToker was saying that we can't look at the free market to decide whether a country is socialist or capitalist. Well, but if you look at Marx's own writings and the Communist Manifesto, he called for abolishing free trade and replacing it with centrally planned production. So by definition, the OG socialism was never even meant to exist with free trade, and it was not supposed to have profit incentives that was totally allowed in China. So how can you call that a socialist success? Even today in China, private sector is responsible for 60% of GDP, 70% of innovation, 80% of urban jobs, and 90% of new employment. State-owned enterprises remain true, but they're inefficient and heavily subsidized. The dynamism, the drive, the profits, the technology, innovation, and all the success of China never came from the socialist side of it. It came from the capitalist side of it. And that makes sense because Marx never meant socialism to have any of these drivers.